Imagine an economic system that lifts everyone up, where prosperity doesn't come at the cost of equity and sustainability. In this episode, we explore concrete ideas and actionable steps to reshape capitalism into a system that works for every one of us. Welcome to Capitalism 2.0, how it can drive success and sustainable progress. Hi, James. Good to see you again.
Hi, Chris. Good to see you too.
So, we are going to be talking about capitalism and how to make it work better. We've seen situations in recent years that made it very clear that it's not a perfect system, certainly, and inequality issues and rise of populism in reaction to that. So we've seen a lot of ramifications of the shortcomings of capitalism. So let's talk about how to make the system better. One thing I would highlight is we've talked about innovation and how
Yep,
that is something that is encouraged in a capitalistic environment. And
yep.
we've seen a lot of benefit from innovation and advancement in technology. However, one implication of that is the innovators, a lot of time, wind up with a lot of wealth concentration. And some of the innovations that has benefited society at large have also worsened inequality in the system. So let's talk about how can we make sure we are adequately rewarding innovators economically, but at the same time making sure that we have safeguards in place to ensure that that reward is fair, but also doesn't inordinately worsen inequality in society. So my question is, acknowledging the fact that we have all been beneficiaries of innovation and the capitalistic environment encourages innovation. But what we've also noticed is that as part of the incentive of innovators, left unchecked, the economic reward for innovators has also worsened inequality in society. So, how do we make sure that we preserve that incentive, continue to reward innovators fairly, but reduce the externalities, the negative implications for inequality in society?
So I think you made a very good point, but I think we should first of all take a step back and look at where we've come from. So by 1800, we saw 95% of the world population living in extreme poverty. But by 2020, it was actually less than 5% of the world population that is living in extreme poverty. Even if that 5% is still a huge number, especially when you talk in relation to Africa. But we've actually come a very long way, and that was driven by free market capitalism and democracies that was able to lift a lot of people from poverty. So capitalism in itself is not a perfect system, but is one of the most balanced systems that humanity has ever tried, that has lifted a record people out of poverty. And if we could follow on that same hockey stick, we could see that we could actually lift even more people out of poverty in the next 30 to 50 to 100 years. So I think we should look at this as a century problem before we could actually judge if capitalism was able to be effective or not effective. Because if between the 19 the first industrial revolution, which started in the 1800s, till the fourth industrial revolution, we were able to leave 95% or 90% of the world out of poverty. I think we could take it further. And now there's also your point about the reward of capitalism and technology that accrues into the hands of very few people. I would say that is actually more of a function of technology because technology tends to aggregate a lot of consumer into one platform. So most of the wealth that was created in the past 30 years within the technological vertical has been accrued into the hands of very few people because of platforms, and platforms tend to have this winner take all effect, and they tend to have a lot of product market fit that drive a lot of consumer on that one platform. So a company like Facebook or Instagram would actually eventually have everybody in it because of that network effect and drive a lot of users onto the platform instead of making it go into other platforms. That is actually the side effect of technology. There's a network effect with technology, and that is actually the problem with capitalism and capitalist companies because that problem is the fact that this network effect aggregate everybody under one platform and the wealth gets created for that company. Now, coming down to the company level, there's one issue of inequality, which is between the employees and the employers. There's a huge gap between the employees and the employers, and that is actually one inequality that we could actually tackle with, I believe, equity compensation and more equity-based compensation for the employees that are actually building the product alongside the CEO and the shareholders. So employees should become stakeholders in capitalist companies. And at a broader level, there's in the society the wealth disparity it creates for the person that built the products, or the founder, the CEOs, or the person with the most equity, to the average person that uses the product. So what we could do in that regard is we could actually increase taxation for large swath of the wealthy billionaires and the people that are getting all of that equity concentration and that equity profit. So I think to your point, I think that is like one way we could actually rethink capitalism in that regards.
I agree, and I think case in point, this week, uh, I heard this headline about Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, um, making the same point that the billionaires should pay more taxes, the wealthy should pay more
Yeah,
taxes,
I
and
totally agree.
I yeah, and not the first time he's making that point, and he's not the first you know wealthy or millionaire or billionaire to make that point, and that's really how you generate revenue that you can invest in infrastructure, right, to get the most out of more people in society and reduce inequality and provide. That's how you can generate revenue to invest in infrastructure that that can provide necessary input for the productivity of society at large. Do you
I
have
have a question for you
any,
though.
yes?
Yeah, so I think since we kind of like pointed out that taxation could be a very effective tool, taxation in itself has not been effectively allocated into infrastructure development for most parts, for most regions of the world. How can we effectively make taxation to productively work for other parts of the economy that will benefit the large swath of population?
That's an important point because part of the pushback of people, who argue against higher taxes is it's about the effectiveness of governments, and they point to corruption in government. They point to about ineffective allocation of capital, by governments. And so that's a long running problem, a long running challenge, and I think the onus is on governments to demonstrate um, that they can be better stewards of capital But that's that. I'm not expecting that to change anytime soon. We've seen emergence of public-private partnerships. I think in societies where you see a lot of pushback on higher taxes, maybe one way to do it, where government wants to convince people that they're going to be using this capital, investing for the right infrastructure. Perhaps they could link the tax rates to specific investments in infrastructure. So there's transparency in terms of where the capital is going. I can't even point to any government that's doing that specifically, but where you have a lot of pushback, maybe that's one way to go about it. But while the case for investment in infrastructure pretty much makes itself a lot of times, the we have to be sort of also acknowledge that we have a lot of examples where governments have been wasteful, with resources, and that's certainly a challenge that I think has to be faced and worked through. At least where governments have done an okay, a better job versus investment in infrastructure instead of in economic transfers, particularly in governments where you have strong welfare programs. That has been a good way of strengthening the safety net across society, and that's certainly positive. But that's more of a challenge in developing economies, where government transfers are more sporadic, less reliable, and but certainly something to be encouraged, because in our earlier discussion you were talking about COVID transfers providing a case study, where you had those transfers and what that meant in terms of ensuring that um, the standards of living of people were supported, in a challenging time. But then on the other side of that, you had, up hyperinflation, and maybe that test case gives governments some learnings in terms of, how much to do next time, or what level is sustainable, and what level is advisable. Um, Perhaps there's data coming out of that now that governments can use in the future to sort of level set. But another thing I just want to pivot to is really the importance of having discussion now, is because we're having a major shift in technology with AI, and the changes that are going to come from there. The impact on productivity is going to be huge. The impact on wealth concentration is going to be significant as well, unless there are changes made. And because on the one hand, you're going to see certain jobs being made um, redundant or irrelevant, or being taken over by technology, and on the other side, you're going to have people who are the innovators doing very well economically as a result of these changes. So it's important to think about this now, because society is going to go through a major change in the next few
Yeah,
years, about the next decade, and it's important
absolutely.
to have this nailed down and be ready to make necessary adjustments in society. And one of those ways to do it is UBI. And maybe you want to talk a little more about that, link that to what happened in the pandemic and lessons from.
Yeah.
There are pilot programs running all over the place, and how well to implement that.
So UBI is a very interesting concept, and it's a much needed concept because technology, automation, artificial intelligence, robotics is going to displace a lot of jobs. It might actually improve most jobs, but to actually displace a lot of jobs. And the question remains that what would be the effect on the society when that happens? So one way a lot of economics have actually thought about this is universal basic income, which is literally about incentivizing um, unemployed people that are displaced from those jobs with economic incentives to actually function properly and live properly. And I think we've actually tried UBI. I think we've actually tested UBI indirectly during the pandemic when the whole world went on lockdowns, and we needed to keep the society needed to be kept running economically, from paying of rent to household expenses. And the United States actually started, first of all, reduced interest rates to like 0%, and also started quantitative easing and gave a lot of money out to Americans as a form of stimulus package. And that stimulus package eventually resulted in inflation, and the highest inflation we've seen within the last 20 years in the United States. And that speaks a lot of the characteristics of UBI, which is still a monetary issue. UBI will remain a monetary issue, as long as we see UBI this way, right? Um, if the UBI we think of is to actually give people money, it will obviously create inflation because you have to print money in order to help, in order to create the UBI program you want. So currently we have social welfare programs, and that is not really money being printed, but that is money coming from taxation, right? And even currently, the US is kind of like running a 2 trillion deficit on this debt, and really like $2 trillion like deficit, and you also have social welfare programs to cater for. And now you want to include UBI. And if you don't want to print money, you actually have to bring out that UBI from taxation or cut a little bit from social welfare programs to put it in UBI. The better way we could achieve this is for Moore's law to actually have its effect through capitalism and free markets and through technology. So Moore's law is really about technology becoming cheaper, faster, better, and actually creating a deflationary effect. So mobile phones were very expensive in the 1980s, 1990s, till today. But right now, today, we can actually have mobile phones less than um, a smartphone that's all capabilities less than $100. UBI could have its more slow moment in a sense that every component of UBI that is needed for population to function effectively without jobs, which would mean rents, households, expenses, and energy consumption and transportation, could actually that UBI cost could actually be felt technology. So we should innovate to have cheaper housing. We should innovate to have cheaper, cleaner energy, and we should innovate to have cheaper food and cheaper household expenses. So, and everything that literally comes after that, like buying a $80,000 car or buying a expensive wristwatch, these are actually luxury problems that shouldn't necessarily mean something when it comes to UBI. These are actually luxury problems. We should get that UBI from technology deflation to have cheaper cars, cheaper housing, cheaper food, and cheaper energy consumption. That would actually mean a lot without breaking the back of the economy by printing a lot of money. And also, we would actually have to support a lot of
That's interesting. So if because of innovation we have deflation, then the cost of living just automatically comes down. And so even if you need to support people, what you need for that support is less. That's
people.
interesting. But for technology to lead to deflation, what we've seen is that you need more competition. So
Yeah. Okay.
if we have monopolistic markets, or markets controlled by very few players, what we've seen is that the technology companies retain very high margins, and the innovators keep most of the excess profit. So unless you have the government come in, and with some regulation, which again is sort of a modification of your of capitalistic environment. It doesn't happen that way. When I thought about this, in terms of UBI in a world that is being shaped by AI, um, if there's a way to track and link people whose jobs are being displaced by AI to the excess profit being made from AI, that way you know who you're taxing and you know who you're supporting directly, and
Yeah,
that way you don't have to do any more extra um, taxation to make that happen, right? You could just say some of the
yeah.
profit of AI go to support the people that have been displaced, but you kind of need to have better data and good tracking to make sure that that can be implemented, so that what you're doing with UBI does not unnecessarily drive inflation. What do you think about?
It's a very interesting point you made, because, like you mentioned, we are having some form of monopoly in business right now in capitalism. And while those monopolies, there were once small companies, there were once startups, and it's really the way technology gets its very set up. Make technology work is network effects, and that network effect eventually gets um, captured by these companies, and we see them making a lot of profits. What we should encourage is competition, like you mentioned. We should have There should be a way for smaller companies to actually compete with bigger companies, and which I feel in some way, shape, or forms, uh, some of these companies are losing their grip. So Apple has a App Store policy that makes it very hard it makes it hard for smaller companies to enjoy their profit and their bottom line. And there are regulations currently, especially in the EU, that is like making it in a way that companies and large companies, Silicon Valley companies, are put it in check. And I guess that should be done in the United States also. Um, what I also feel about that is that there are also negative side effects to that. An overregulated, captured industry would be very bad for economic progress. Like in the EU, for example, it's very regulated markets to do business and to build technology there. Same thing with China, but China is pretty unique because they encourage their own people to build technology. I guess we should have a balanced regulation that helps smaller companies to grow and put bigger companies in check so that they won't exercise monopolistic power. Um, but yeah, pretty much we can't really take away the monopoly from them because of network effects. That is the way technology runs.
This has been great. We'll continue this conversation, particularly the connection between innovation, AI, and UBI. I think it's an interesting one and one that
Yeah,
it's very timely. We need to be sharp on that and provide more context for that. Hopefully, policymakers are thinking along the same lines as well. So
yeah.
that'd be great. Fantastic. We'll pick it back up next time. And any final word from you, James?
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. I'll be glad to continue this conversation much later, and very
Fantastic.
timely also.
Great. All
All
right.
right.
Thanks. We'll be back next time. This has been Progress Uncluttered. Comment, like, share, subscribe, and turn on your notification to stay engaged and be a part of the solution. For more, go to progressuncluttered.com where you can comment on this episode. Also go to callsearch.com to contribute your insights to this and other conversations. Links are in the show notes. Our email address is info@progressuncluttered.com. We would love to hear from you. Thanks in advance for your inputs. Catch you next time. Peace.